Good evening. It's Miss Aber, and we are going to be talking about community ecology tonight. So last night or over the weekend you learned about population ecology, so how members of the same species in the same area interact with one another, and now we're going to talk about community ecology, so one level up right there. So a community are all the organisms that live together in a place. And obviously, if organisms live together in a place, they're going to interact with each other. So community ecology is the study of the interactions among all the populations in a common environment. So it's the job of a community ecology is to answer this question: in what way do the populations interact? So if you check out this really groovy watering hole, lots happening there, lots of different organisms, and they're all interacting in a different way. And so that's what community ecology is all about studying. We're looking at the different populations and how they interact with one another. In community ecology, we really worry a lot about the niche. You might say this word as niche. That's okay, but you can say niche too if you want me to like you. A niche is an organism's ecological role in its community. So it's all about what it eats, what it needs for shelter, what it does in the ecosystem in the community. So how it interacts with other populations and how it interacts with the abiotic or non-living factors in the ecosystem defines the organism's niche. So if you think about if the habitat is the address of an organism, then the niche is the job of an organism. So whenever we talk about niche, we always talk about fundamental niche and realized niche. So the fundamental niche of an organism is this ideal, fantasy world where if unicorns were alive and puppy dogs made couches. That didn't make sense. But the fundamental niche, the idea of a fundamental niche, is that if there was no competition and there was no limit amongst where a species could inhabit or could have its job, could have its niche. That's the fundamental niche. The realized niche takes into consideration interaction with other populations in the community. So let's look at this example between the that's how you pronounce that. So that's on the quiz. Hope you wrote that down. Just kidding. It's Thamulus. That's how I'm going to say it. It's difficult. It's a barnacle. It's a barnacle, people. This is also a barnacle. It's called Semibalanus. There are two different species, both found on this rocky coast, and they compete with one another. So the thalamus species, its realized niche is just this little area up here. Its fundamental niche is this whole thing. So its reality, it would love to take over this entire rock. And the Semibalanus, its fundamental and its realized niche is right here where it would like to be. It's just very, very happy and kind of smug too, if you can notice right here. It's smug because its fundamental niche and its realized niche is equal. Okay. The reason they know that the Thamulus barnacle is not meeting its fundamental niche because when you remove species 2, when you remove the Semibalanus barnacle, species 1 occupies the whole tidal zone, so occupies this whole rock. Okay, that's how you know that this is in fact the entire fundamental niche for Thamulus barnacle. That's what you call competitive exclusion. Okay, because species 2, the Semibalanus, outcompetes species 1 at these lower depths. Okay, lower depths. Like I said depths, but I meant depth. And because it is a better competitor, it excludes species 1, the Thamulus barnacle, from its fundamental niche, from having its entire fundamental niche being its realized niche. Here is a question for you to ponder. What do you think would happen in this situation if the semi-balanus barnacle's fundamental niche extended throughout the entire tidal zone? So what I'm saying is, what do you think would happen if the semi-balanus barnacle's fundamental niche extended all the way up to here? What would be the fate of the thalamus barnacle? Sorry, I'm a little jumpy with the slide switching tonight. So more about niche and competition. So I mentioned that term competitive exclusion. So no two similar species can occupy the same niche at the same time. So what do you think would happen if these two kings of the jungle were there at the same time? There would be a rumble in the jungle, wouldn't there? Yeah, there would. Okay. So this is where competition comes from. So that's what we think about when we think of competition in a biological sense. You can't have two of the same species in the same exact niche at the same time. And so nature has kind of figured this out. We can reduce competition through something called resource partitioning. And we can create, well, we don't, but other organisms create micro habitats. Yeah, pretty cool. So resource partitioning is a way to take one habitat and to kind of almost divvy up the resources in that habitat and to turn it into microhabitats. And so it's kind of the way of saying that, okay, look, you and I, we are in direct competition, but if you take the high road and I'll take the low road, do you see where I'm going with this? So this example here is Dominican Republic lizards. And so there are 7 species of analogous lizards. They live in very close proximity, and they all feed on the same things. They all feed on insects and other small arthropods. Um, so normally they would be in direct competition with one another, right? They all trying to eat the same things. So they'd be like, "Hey, Christopher, get out, that's my bug." And Christopher would be like, "No way, Sabates, that's mine. Give it to me." And they would compete with each other until one would dominate and the other would become extinct in this habitat. And that's not cool. Peace, man. So instead what happens is that there's something called resource partitioning. And so even within this small habitat, you can create these micro habitats, and each lizard species actually has a different perch. So where these different species are delineated in this picture is where you would find them. So they have a distinct niche. So they're all eating these different bugs, but you know, Distichus, oh sorry, it's not working my PowerPoint skills today. So Distichus is like, or Ricordi is like, okay, so this is my territory, and Enceladus, you can't come to my territory. This is mine, so you can stay here. And he's like, yeah, that's fine, 'cause I've got this sweet treetop over here. And Christopher is like, it's cool because I've got this sweet branch, and Cyboat's got his place over there, and Melissa Etheridge, you're all too young to get that joke. Google that, please. Gets the floor, and then Alleninger gets the air over there, and Distor just gets this sweet fence. So all of these different lizards have these different areas. They're still competing for bugs, but they have a different habitat. So that way they can compete with each other, but they've reduced that competition so that we can all live in harmony. So think of it kind of like, I don't know, maybe like gang territory? I don't know, touchy subject, perhaps? And so it's kind of like the ghosts of competition past. So like they've had this battle and they've decided territories. It's the way they're going to deal with that. So there are different types of interspecific interactions. So inter, between two different, and specific species interactions. So the first one we'll discuss is symbiotic interactions. You might have heard of this term before in other biology classes. Um, so the first one we'll talk about is competition, and this is where the two species, actually nobody wins. They both compete for a limited resource. We've discussed competitive exclusion. So it's a lose-lose, and it's no good. And you can see, like in the Galapagos finches, where you have a common ancestor, and then they all like had to, is a good example of competitive exclusion. Predation and parasitism is an example of symbiotic interaction where the predator or a parasite feeds on a host. It's beneficial for one organism and not beneficial for another organism. Then we have mutualism, which is a win-win. It's beneficial for both organisms. Lichens is an example of that, which is a mutualistic relationship between algae and fungus, or alga if you want to be British. They're pretty, aren't they? And then commensalism, which is a relationship that is win-meh. And by meh, I mean that the other organism doesn't really gain or lose anything. So barnacles attach to whales because they can't move on their own, but whales can really go places. So whenever they want to, see the world, they hitch a ride on a whale, which is really cool when you think about it. So here are some examples of relationships. So here again is commensalism. You can have a plant growing out of a hollow in a tree. Mutualism, you've got the clownfish and the, oh my gosh, sorry, PowerPoint is being ridiculous. Don't know what's going on here, people. Sorry, remember the lizards, right? Oliver Summit. It's just my way of reviewing for you really quickly. I hope you're not getting motion sickness. Okay. The clownfish secretes a mucus that protects itself from the stinging tentacles and the toxins from the anemone for the Nemo fans. Yeah, it's not very funny for a clownfish, huh? And then we have predation to the nasty spider. Oh, it's not very nice. And that's a win-lose. And then we do have competition, where two organisms are competing for resources. And so it's just lose-lose. It's just a life lesson there, people. Competition. So here are some things to think about. You've got ants on an acacia tree, and to maybe think about what relationship that could be. You could take a look on your internets to try to find that out. Here you have an impala, and the birds there are oxpeckers. So see if you can find out what kind of relationship that is. And I hope that's self-explanatory. What kind of what's going on there? So hopefully you don't have to Google what kind of relationship that is. And there you have a bee and a beautiful echinacea flower. Predation drives evolution. We've talked about this a few times before. So predators gain adaptations. Their adaptations help them locate their prey, and then also to try to catch their prey, or you could use as a fancier word, subdue prey. There's some cool prey pictures, or sorry, predator pictures. And prey also have adaptations to help them try to not get dead. So to help them elude their predators, also to defend themselves against their predators if they happen to get into close contact. So horns can help them defend themselves. Animals that tend to get attacked tend to be fast. Also, predators tend to be fast. It all depends on that predator-prey relationship. And then coloration plays a large role in the predator-prey relationship. We'll talk about that. On plants, you never think about plants as being prey, but think about it. We eat plants a lot, or hopefully we do if we want to be healthy. And plants have lots of adaptations to prevent predators from getting at them. Um, as Axl Rose said, every rose has its thorn. Um, so plants have thorns, they have toxins, they have spines, they have sticky substances on them to try to prevent bugs from being able to crawl up them. All sorts of really cool things that plants do to prevent predators. There are also some plants that can secrete toxins into the ground surrounding them so no other plant can get near them. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, there's a good example of toxins. Spicy chili peppers. So predation, just to sum it up, provides a very strong selection pressure on both the prey and the predator. And so we can see this kind of back and forth. And the moth lab, I think a lot of you got that, really understood that. So some anti-predator adaptations. Um, that come into play. We see different organisms trying to hide from predators. Definitely is a good idea, don't you think? So they try to avoid detection. They use camouflage. Check that out. And then there's the opposite, where they try to warn predators. Basically, the prey wants to advertise to the predator, hey, you don't want to eat me. And we call this aposematic coloration, stemming from apo meaning away and somatic meaning some kind of sign or meaning. And this is really smart. I mean, it's obviously really smart to try to hide from your predator, but then on the other side, it's really smart to advertise to your predator, hey, I'm toxic. If you eat me, you will die. It's much smarter to advertise that rather than as the predator is chomping on you, for you to go, as you're eating me, guess what? You're gonna die. Because guess what? You're dying too. And that just doesn't work out. So just something to consider. So there are two types of things to consider in aposematic coloration. There's Batesian mimicry and there's Mullerian mimicry. We'll talk about those, I promise you. So some defense mechanisms, again, camouflage. We can also call that cryptic coloration. Look at the whippoorwill. That's difficult to see, isn't it? The lizard blends right in. Can you see that right there? And the toad does a rather good job as well with camouflage. And the lizard. And then there's mimicry. So here we have Batesian mimicry. And Batesian mimicry is when one species mimics another, and it's the species that's doing the mimicking isn't harmful. So a palatable or harmless species, so a species that the predator could totally eat and be just fine, is mimicking a harmful model. These snake pictures are really freaking me out. How about you? So this is a green parrot snake, and this is a hawk moth larvae. Sounds cool, hawk moth. Anyhow, the hawk moth larva puffs up to look like this poisonous green parrot snake, but it's not poisonous. It's just frontin'. It's just poofing up. It's not harmful at all. But the green parrot snake is in fact no good. It's harmful. This is an example of convergent evolution. Do you think you could tell me how? Write it down. Write it down. Good. So more about Batesian mimicry. So this is a pretty classic example here. The monarch male is poisonous, and looks like this. It's pretty classic. Look, the monarch butterfly. And the viceroy male is edible. So would you be able to tell the difference between the two if you were out in the wild and for some reason you had to eat bugs? Would you be able to tell the difference between the two? I don't know. I don't think I could. I think I would just call it a day and, just eat the pretty flowers or something. Okay, so the monarch male is poisonous, the viceroy male is edible. This is a classic example of Batesian mimicry. The viceroy male is mimicking the pattern as the monarch male has. So that way it's kind of like saying to predators, hey, look, I'm totally toxic. Don't eat me. Right? I mean, this bird's like, whatever, I'm not eating you. It's bad. You're gross. I can't eat that. See, look, it's barfing right there. Probably not. But how about right here? Which one's the fly? Which one's the bee? Can you tell? Fly, bee, bee, fly. Yeah. Who got it right? Hmm? Probably all A block. Oh, yeah. How about over here? Which is the moth? Which one's the bee? This one's a little easier, isn't it? Yeah. Moth, bee. Yeah, hopefully everybody got that right. Sorry to rash on you, C block. Just gotta shout out to my peeps. Again, Batesian mimicry, an example of convergent evolution. No common ancestor, however, similar selective pressures have caused the same feature to come through. So now, Mullerian mimicry. I always want to say that word as Mullerian mimicry. Okay, so Mullerian mimicry is when two or more protected species look like each other. So both of these species, you don't want to mess around with either a yellow jacket or a cuckoo bee. They're both totally bad, you know? The idea is maybe this kind of group defense thing that maybe once the predators have learned that this black and yellow striped pattern is no good, then that this black and yellow striped pattern is no good as well. So they're kind of taking pity on their predators and saying, look, we know you're a predator, you have a lot of stuff going on in your life. Your iPhone's going off constantly as a predator. So just all you have to learn is that black and yellow is no good. So don't mess with us. It's just so that as a group, the prey has protection and the predators know to avoid this black and yellow. And then this is cool too. It's like, don't mess with school buses. All school buses look like, right? The Mullerian mimicry, although there's sometimes the flat tops. And then there's these guys. And predators know, or cars know not to mess with them. I shouldn't say predator, it's bad. Okay, so aposematic species have come to resemble each other. So there's this common warning coloration. Check it out. There's all this brilliant coloring in the animal kingdom. Okay, and this is all aposematic warning. So a general rule of thumb is something is really bright and you're like, ooh, pretty. Don't eat it. Just don't. Not a good idea. It's probably toxic. Yeah, see a little penguin dude? Black, red, orange, and yellow means don't eat me. So here we have an example of two different kinds of snakes and see if you can tell me what kind of mimicry this is. The coral snake is poisonous and the king snake is not. So do 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 do. What kind of mimicry? Hmm? Hmm? Is it Batesian or is it Mullerian? Yeah, it's Batesian. If you got that, you're awesome. If you didn't, you're still awesome. But you probably want to flip back a few slides and make sure you know the difference between Batesian and Mullerian mimicry. And then something cool to remember, just for life, is this little thing. red on yellow, poison fellow. So the coral snake, red on yellow. Red on black, the king snake, safe from attack. Cool, right? So red on yellow, poison fellow, red on black, safe from attack. So I don't know about you, but if I encounter either one of these snakes in the wild, I'm going in the opposite direction. I'm just going to let them be. So coevolution in the community, this was on your reading guide. We wanted you to infer this from the reading, is how does coevolution happen in the community? Well, no population exists in a community without interacting with some other kind of population, if not more than one. So there are predator-prey relationships, parasite-host relationships, here, see that's kind of cool, flowers and pollinators, and those also affect how both are going to evolve. So these three relationships all affect coevolution in the community. And they just adjust. There's these long-term evolutionary adjustments and adaptations between the two species. So a way to characterize a community definitely has structure. There has to be a lot of species diversity in a community. And so you can characterize a community based on the species diversity. So one, how many different species there are. And you can look at the composition. One, what's the dominant species? Two, what's the most abundant species or the highest biomass? And highest biomass is just the total weight. You can discuss the keystone species of the community. And then you can discuss the changes over time in a community, because a community is not often stable. And changes over time in a community is what we call succession. So to discuss further species diversity, in general, the more diversity a community has, the more species diversity a community has, the greater stability. Isn't that just like a beautiful statement? You know, you can take it from biology and just apply it to the world. It's just lovely. But it's true, the greater diversity, the greater stability. So greater biodiversity offers one more food resources. So if your favorite species of seed or plant goes extinct or has a bad year, you have something else to go on. Think about food in this way. What if we only ate one thing? I don't mean just pizza. I mean, what if we only ate Macintosh apples? That's it. That's all we ate. We didn't drink milk. We didn't drink juice. Nothing. We only ate Macintosh apples, and that's it, period. They're good. However, what if something happened to Macintosh apples? The trees that year just didn't produce enough apples. Yikes, right? And think about all the different plants and animals that we eat. It's a good thing. So if it's a bad year for corn, it stinks because I really like corn, but there's other things to eat, and that's good. Greater biodiversity also offers more habitats. So remember how we talked about those microhabitats for the Dominican Republic lizards? That was really cool. They could take what they needed and they could find like different microhabitats. And the more biodiversity within a community, the more the community has that ability to do that. And probably the biggest thing is that the greater diversity a community has, it has more resilience in the face of any kind of environmental change. So if anything were to happen to the community, say a fire, say a flood, say a drought, say global climate change, it can deal with it more the more species diversity it has. So when we reduce biodiversity, it can have really this great impact. And just to drive it home, here's an example. So here we have an old field. Hopefully you've been able to experience seeing something like this once in your life. And then here is a suburban lawn. What's the difference between these two communities? I'll give you a moment while I sip some water. How hard is it to maintain a suburban lawn? It really does take quite a bit of effort, right? It can take a lot of chemicals and watering and really does take quite a bit of effort. And then we have the monoculture, agricultural, where we have this crop, and oftentimes, especially in modern farming, this is a clone. This is all, the same exact plant, row after row after row, same exact plant. And what do you think could happen? I mean, yes, they are genetically modified to be resistant to disease, but what do you think could happen if there was a disease that came along that it was not genetically modified to resist? And that's what happened in the 1970s. The US planted this corn crop that was genetically modified to resist majority of diseases, most of the diseases. It was a great idea at the time. People thought this is going to be great. We're going to plant this crop. It's resistant to disease. We're going to make all this corn. It's going to be awesome. However, there was a fungus that spread that it was not genetically modified against, and it was actually really susceptible to. And the corn crop failed that year. And luckily, we do eat more than corn. The same thing is what happened to the historic Irish potato famine. Um, there was a fungus that spread through that crop as well, and most of the potato crop died. People died of starvation, and we had a huge immigration of Irish people to America because of the Irish potato famine. Um, Pretty kind of interesting that vegetable has historic impact. Whereas if we didn't have an entire field of the same crop, maybe it wouldn't have spread so quickly or we wouldn't have such a huge failure. Keystone species are also part of a community. They have an influential ecological role, and they have this important regulating effect on all the other species in the community. So in the Washington Coast community, it's the sea star. And you can see that with the sea star in the community, um, diversity increases. You can see on this graph of number of species present. So with Pisaster ocraceus, it's a really cool name. I think I'm going to name like future children that or something. Yo, Pisaster! So Pisaster ocraceus, with it present, diversity increases. Then if you remove Pisaster from the community, diversity decreases. You have these mussels outcompete with other species. So we call that a keystone species. It's kind of like, without you, we're nothing. We need you. You hold us all together. So that's the keystone species. Regulates, keeps everything in balance. So without that keystone species, the entire community runs amok. In the North Pacific, the sea otter is the keystone predator. So you can see here, once the sea otter goes down, the percent of sea otter goes down, sea urchin biomass rises, kelp density goes down. It's just a crazy, crazy thing. It's not good. In your study guide, please answer the question, what is the impact of the orca whale? So take a look at this food chain, take a look at these graphs, and tell me what is the impact of the orca whale on the sea otter and the North Pacific food chain. In the Northeast and the West, the beaver is the keystone species. Look at their hard work there. So good job. Well done. You could almost say, it's a damn good job. That's so good. So dams transform these flowing streams into ponds, and they go ahead and they create a new habitat. Remember how, at least in A block, we were talking about, well, humans are the only species that can transform their environments to change them? That is not the case, because check out that dam. Yeah, I'm done saying dam. Okay. Let's talk about succession. It's one of my favorite topics, especially with the eruption of Mount St. Helens. It's a fascinating documentary about Mount St. Helens. You get a chance to watch it. I highly, highly recommend it. It's all about after the eruption and what happened. So succession is this sequence of how a community changes in species composition over time. And this can take a few years and this can take decades. And it's usually after some kind of disturbance like a volcanic eruption. So primary succession, so there are two types of succession. There's primary succession and there's secondary succession. The first one we'll talk about is primary succession, and it begins with this lifeless area, this virtually lifeless area that's without soil. So think, you can often see primary succession starting in rocks, starting in pavement. You can come take a look at my driveway. There's these cracks with plants coming out of it, and I leave it because it's beautiful primary succession happening, and it's also hard to rip those weeds out. It's lifeless area. There's no soil. The volcano erupting and creating new land out in Hawaii is also primary succession. There's no soil. Nothing has been living there before. When glaciers retreat, okay, that's also primary succession. The first thing that comes in is bacteria. Then lichens and mosses. So check that out. That's pretty cool. Not beautiful. Bacteria, lichens, and mosses make soil. So their organic waste makes is such a low pH. It's acidic and it can erode away at the rock and kind of break it down and start to make soil. And if it's in primary succession happens faster in colder areas because that freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing makes cracks in the rock happen faster. Once you have that soil, then grasses can take root, then you can get shrubs, then trees. And so this is your traditional primary succession flow. Secondary succession is when an existing community is cleared, so maybe in a fire or something, but the base soil is still intact. And so you have a fire and then eventually it'll come back. And fire is not necessarily like a really horrible thing. There are forests that require frequent fires. It's a cycle of the forest because the burning can release nutrients that are locked up in the tissues of the tree. So the trees have kind of like sucked up all of these nutrients and now they're stuck in there because trees are these huge, massive things. And it's only through fire can those nutrients be returned to the soil. So just to go over it again, a succession of species happens, whether it's primary or secondary, happens in the same way. You start with lichens and mosses that'll start to inhabit the area. And we call those the pioneer species. So just like the pioneers that went out west, they're like going out into this open area and they're, new territory, they're taking it over, trying to build something new. Then we move on to grasses. Grasses do really well in highly sunlit areas, and they're, really hardy plants, these grasses. Then we move on to bushes and small trees. They're really kind of scraggly, but they're more shade tolerant now as we're getting to starting to create some shade with these small trees. And then we eventually get to having full trees and having shade tolerant species. This is a stable community, this last community here, all these trees, and we call that the climax forest. It's what we eventually end up with. So we start our pioneer species, start here, with lichens and mosses, then we move to grasses, then bushes and small trees, then trees, okay? So what causes those plants to come into place? What causes those change in species over time? One has to do with tolerance. One has to do with how the community has changed. The early species are these weedy, R-selected species. They grow at an exponential rate. They reproduce really quickly. So they're great for this new harsh conditions. They're fine with it. Um, these early species also do something really interesting, and they change the habitat. So they start to change the pH of the soil. They change the fertility of the soil by making it more fertile, right? Rather than less. They can bring more nutrients into the soil. They also change light levels. So we started from having tons of sunlight, where the pioneer species were, and then starting to move to increasingly bringing in more shade with our bushes and small trees, and then finally to our real trees. Okay, so we change the light levels of the habitat. And then this allows other species to outcompete over time. Okay, so that's what causes all of these other species to come in, is that the early species start to change the habitat. And what's interesting is that as they're doing that, they're actually making the habitat less hospitable for themselves. Isn't that odd? Okay, so they're actually making it like kind of very comfy for these other species to come in and then outcompete. Very fascinating thing that happens there in succession. So a climax forest, this is a plant community. It's dominated by trees. We're very, very familiar with climax forests, right? This is what surrounds us here in New England. This is the final stage of the natural succession. And again, it's a stable plant community, and it's essentially unchanged in the species composition as long as the site remains undisturbed. Full of trees such as the birch. We know that because of its white bark, the beech tree, the maple tree, and the hemlock tree. You can also have oak trees, hickory, and pine tree over here on the right. Some more pictures of climax forests. And the mix of the trees, the reason why you might have different trees, whether it's an evergreen forest or deciduous forest, depends on those abiotic factors of the region. And we'll talk about different biomes and what species make up the different biomes coming up soon. So different abiotic factors would be how much sunlight or solar energy levels, be temperature, how much precipitation, and the fertility and depth of the soil. So this evergreen forest, we like to call a taiga, and then the temperate deciduous forest, this is where the trees lose their leaves in the winter, is made up of the birch, beech, maple, and hemlock trees. And this is what we have around us. This is what you see up north. And disturbances, these, we think of these things, disturbances to communities, as these bad things, but they're often necessary for the development and survival of the community. So, the fires, they're part of the natural cycle, and I've mentioned that before. They release nutrients and they can end up increasing biodiversity, because think about it, if you have this, shaded, check this picture out, there's not a lot of biodiversity in here, right? And you've got trees and then maybe some little bits here that can live. And then after the fire, we release the nutrients that have been stored up into the trees, and then now we have some wildflowers until we reach a stable community again. We call these forests that depend on frequent fires climax forests. And there are absolutely species that depend on fire to regenerate the community every so often. The jack pine is an example of one. It has an adaptation to survive and reproduce in areas that experience frequent fires. And the hard thing about studying ecology and knowing this, that some forests require frequent fires, is that people tend to not know about this, or not care about this, and homes are built in these fire climax zones, and it's a sad thing, people, especially out west, just there's frequent forest fires, and they're very close to people's homes, and it can be a really sad and upsetting thing. people losing, you know, their possessions and getting hurt, and it's a sad thing. And the hard thing is that when you prevent fires, it can make next year's fires even worse. So come with questions for tomorrow. We'll review this. And don't blow your top. Ha!